Welcome to another segment of Her God, a program designed by women, for women, about women's issues. Today we have a very special program for all of you ladies, and we're going to talk about a very important topic that many of us go through, but we don't know how to manage it very well. We keep it to ourselves, and we often pray that it will go away. We're continually praying that this problem will go away. And Mary is our model on managing suffering with faith. My name is Anne-Marie Lee. I'm from the United States, and I have a master's in social work. I've done social work in hospitals and different places, and I've been helping with the Ministry of Divine in India and in the United States for some years. We have with us today Mrs. Rena Anthony, who is a minister, a preacher here at Divine Retreat Center. She also is very active in serving in her parish, and she does the ministry with her husband. So we all are familiar with Rena. And also Dr. Josephine Wilson has come again to our panel. Doctor from Chennai, taken some time off from her busy practice to be with us to talk about this topic today. And so I just have a small, we all have a long testimony about suffering in our lives, but I do remember a time when it was very, very difficult to lose a parent. My father died, and I remember going back to work, and in the hospital where I was working, and you know, it continually, this great sigh would come out of me that came out of nowhere, and it was the agony of what I had just been through. And a minister came to me, and she shared with me, remember Psalm 23, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. And she told me, you're going to get through this valley of darkness. And so to meditate on, you know, as I was walking through this unbelievable grief that I'd never had before, there was a presence who was also walking with me, and it would be passing over. So I want to start with Dr. Josephine, who, as a doctor, sees a lot of suffering and the effects of suffering on people, and also is currently experiencing a lot of physical suffering too. So you can open up, maybe tell us a little about, you know, your own personal suffering right now and how you're managing that.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. And as you said, suffering, you know, when I hear the word suffering, I'm reminded of Jesus. You know, the word suffering is all about, you know, our difficulties. We always try to stop them. We never wanted to go into that environment at all. We always want us, you know, kept away from suffering. You know, I'm like, I have the best of parents, best of the husband, and, you know, my children. Everything was good. There's nothing that I can complain. There's hardly anything that I suffer. But it was all like that when I just lost my dad about 3 years back, you know. And to me, that loss was such a big suffering. Like, you know, I was just not able to think how I would face the next day without my dad. And it was then when I realized that God, the Father, Jesus is there for me. And when, you know, I was reminded that Don Bosco, where his mentor told him, there's nobody in this world without a father. You know, so I took up that word and I said, yes, there's nobody in this world without a father. So even if I lose my physical relationship of my father on the earth, I know my dad is in eternity, and I continue to have a father forever.
And you're also going through some physical suffering now too.
So with all that, I started working very hard. You know, I started telling myself, no, I will not show this suffering is going to hurt me. So I'm going to become very normal. So I started doing a lot of work, and, you know, I was trying to distract myself rather than thinking about my dad. So I used to encourage everybody around, do extra work, do extra hours of work. And I completely forgot that I too had a physical existence, you know. And in the month of March, I underwent a spine surgery. I had a slip disc, and I had a spine surgery, and I had developed a foot drop. And for a doctor, you can imagine, especially being a gynecologist, to be ridden on the bed, you know. So, I had been for a retreat in January, you know, and I had completely refreshed myself in spirit. But there I go back, In a matter of 4 weeks, I'm back with a major illness, you know. So it was all, I was just wondering. So if anybody who watches this or hears this will wonder, how can a person with so much of faith go through suffering?
I think that's a good point. You know, there's another worry too, that what have I done wrong to deserve this suffering?
This suffering,
So,
yeah.
you know, if your father dies, is that your wrong? No, you didn't do anything wrong. But the mind questions the suffering constantly,
yeah.
and we cannot accept. So you've learned, though, somehow to
Yeah.
accept in faith. If you can tell us how you did that.
So what had happened is I suddenly realized, I got up one morning and I just got down to send my children to school, and my entire leg, you know, it was just like a pull from my back to my legs where I couldn't even stand, and I just had to lie down. And almost for the next 48 hours, I couldn't even lie. I was just, you know, I was literally bending and I was only able to sit. And no painkillers helped me, no doctors could help me. But one thing I knew is, like, I just continued to pray. You know, I just continued to pray. I said, no, Lord, you're not going to give me any cross that I cannot bear. You know, this is what was constantly going on inside me. I just said, no, Lord, you're not going to give me anything that I cannot bear. And in fact, it became to an extent where the doctor started thinking whether my pain capacity was less, that I'm making you know, it was considered that, you know, but I was not able to bear it. And then after 10 days, I realized my leg, I developed a foot drop, you know, I was literally dragging my foot. And I had to be on bed, and then I had to go through an emergency surgery. And I thought all was over with the surgery. You know, I thought I'm going to just be back to normal and get back to my routine. But that's when I realized this nerve had been injured, and the foot drop is going to persist after that. And I still had to continue to drag my leg, you know, and I had to start up exercises within 2 weeks. And anybody who around, you know, especially my family, they all started wondering why a person in so much of prayer and faith is going through all this.
I think that's a good point. You feel judged.
I was just wondering. I was just, you know, many a times, even, you know, when I used to be alone in my room praying, I used to tell God, please don't let anybody think I'm suffering because I'm close to you. You know, I used to, you know, I don't know why I used to feel that way. God, just tell them that, you know, I have accepted this suffering well. You know, I don't want to show people, you know, I have a God who cannot support me. I have a God who's completely protecting me. And I'm not worried about my suffering. And please, God, don't, you know, let nobody get discouraged. But because of faith, they suffer. So I kept telling this to Jesus. And it was in my weakness that I started finding God more. You know, and again I had to, you know, the doctors told me to get back to bed for 1 month. Of again, another 3 months later, again I was put on bed rest, you know. I continued to have some pain, and, you know, at every moment of pain, although we get back to our scriptures and we read the Bible, but then in our pain, you know, we start wondering, you know, are we really close to God, and why is the pain coming back, you know. But I started realizing in my pain that I was more closer to God.
That's the key. Now, how did you get that recognition?
Yes, I started reading books. I started watching videos on sufferings by saints. I started reading books on suffering. And, you know, not that because I was suffering, because I thought I started becoming empathetical towards suffering. You know, so I wanted to start telling people that suffering is not a sign of failure. Please. It's a complete sign of, you know, glorification in God's name. So to feel glorified, you really need to accept every moment of your suffering. So in my pain, I started completely glorifying God, you know. So every moment I used to, you know, lie down and pray for all the souls, all the dead members of my family. And, you know, I started enjoying suffering. In fact, many a times, you know, my kids used to come and ask me, Mommy, are you having pain? So I used to say, yes, I'm having pain. So they're like, you're having pain? So I'm like, yeah. So what are you doing? So I say, I'm praying. So,
you know, that reminds me, I mean, if you come to that point of then saying that we don't want to say I enjoy the suffering, but there's something so fruitful about that suffering.
Yes.
That it's giving you something. It's giving you some grace. Maybe it's the grace.
Yes.
It's giving you some grace that you didn't have without the suffering.
Yes.
It reminds me of what St. Alphonsus said, don't ask me to pray for you, she said, because unless you don't want suffering, or you want suffering, because I'm only going to pray that you will have suffering. So St. Alphonsa loved suffering, as you said, so much. When she prayed for others, she would pray they would also enjoy this wonderful gift of suffering. So that whole attitude of, of take it away, is now acceptance.
Acceptance, yeah. So the minute I started accepting my problems, and I started feeling a little progress towards where I was, So I could get back to my outpatient department. I had, such difficult deliveries. I could even mention one particular event where these doctors told me, you get a group of doctors and then, you start doing your cases so that you don't have to work much hard. You can just be there because your patients would love you to have you there. Because being an obstetrician, these patients are very sentimental about the doctor delivering the baby.
Sure. Yeah,
So I said, okay, I will be there. And it happened like we were 3 doctors who were going to, plan the delivery. And I was standing on the 3rd position, assisting them. And it so happened the first doctor couldn't deliver the baby. The second doctor couldn't deliver the baby. I had to move to the first position to deliver the baby. So it is God who decides on what strength you have, than what you think of your physical strength. I completely forgot about myself. I said, that baby needs to be delivered. Now, those 2 doctors, it's not that it was a bit difficult. So I moved to the first position. I just prayed and said, God, you help me. And I didn't even remember about my back. I forgot about my pain. And the baby, I delivered the baby and I said, all praise to God. So when I came back and I told my doctors that I did this, so they said, what did you experience? I said, I experienced a lot of, blessings from God. I didn't experience pain. So they said, then I think you're fit to go back to your job. Like, you can start doing your cases, but be a little slow about it. So I feel every moment you start surrendering, the question is you start surrendering, then you feel the complete presence of God at every moment. Even last week I had another patient where this thing called placenta previa, is a very interesting case where we say it's a central placenta previa, and this placenta just lies above the uterus. When you do a cesarean, you have to just cut open the placenta, you have to go into the uterus and pull the baby out. And you need real, physical strength for it. And I had posted this patient believing and praying because this patient had started a sudden emergency bleeding. I had not planned her cesarean. I had planned it for the next week, but she landed up with a severe bleeding episode. So I had to plan an emergency. In the previous day, I had so much of pain, but I was continuing to pray. I said, be it what, let me go. God is giving me the strength. So I went there and I did the cesarean, and you won't believe the placenta is the thing that supplies blood supply to the baby. In 2 minutes, if we don't deliver the baby, then the 4th minute the baby has a permanent brain damage. In 8 minutes, we can lose the baby. So it's that crucial, it's very crucial that you need to really work really hard. And when I just put my hand in, I found the hand of the baby coming out and saying hello to me. And once the hand comes out, it's really impossible to deliver, So I quickly pushed the hand in and I searched for the head and I found it was stuck in one of the corners. Then I quickly put my hand, pulled the leg out of the baby. I pulled it as a breech delivery. I was able to pull out, and the baby came out, and the heart, as soon as I came out, I just said, thank you, God. And I just palpated the heartbeat and it was there. And then the baby just cried, And I just said, praise God, all glory to God. I mean, it was so wonderful that, I just felt God's presence, that is what I'm saying. When you start submitting your sufferings, God not only supports your suffering, He also makes you a blessing for others.
And it also, you think maybe that, this suffering is going to take away my life. But actually, as you were saying, that I'm still able to function and at a higher level even.
Yes.
With that, also the sufferings, they kind of create a space within us to give birth, to a greater understanding of our human life and the sufferings of Christ. And I'm sure that, Rena, you've seen in your ministry a lot of women who come to you perhaps with a lot of heavy burdens, and it's difficult to know how to comfort them. You know, I know in the hospital where I was working, I would see people dying. I saw the elderly dying, at their last moments dying. And I got to see people die and how they die and who dies well and who dies in real agony. And having a lot of money didn't make any difference.
Exactly.
But having a lot of faith and prayer, that person had a deep resource to rely upon to manage that now final surrender of their whole life in pain and agony to God, because they had been full of the prayerful spirit and they knew how to manage their suffering. So do you have some experience of like working with women, or maybe some?
This was many years ago, when after we just got married, a year or so, we had a little baby. And in a week or two, we discovered she had biliary atresia. That is, the bile ducts were blocked and the bile was not flowing to her stomach. And so the doctor said it's quite a difficult situation. One is she may live at the most for just 3 years. They said there could be some operations which they could do to help her. And so, like, this is something we did not really expect, because actually both my husband and myself were very active in the renewal. We were active among the youth. We were dedicated to Christ in one sense. And here the situation cropped up, and that's the time actually when miracles were happening all over the place. So we would begin to pray for healing. My husband actually came to the Lord through healing. We were praying for all these, but nothing was really happening. So the doctor suggested we do a surgery to see if bile would flow, and we took her for surgery. But it was often me who was crying much more than the little one, because she was still a little baby. But I was so troubled, I was so upset to see a little one having to go through so much of surgery, and I was the one taking care of her. And so after a little while, after maybe a month or two, and things were still moving on like this with no real hope for a recovery, we couldn't see signs of recovery as such, I began to pray and ask the Lord, Lord, what do you have in mind for me? Because we were quite active among the youth. I would go and share the scriptures in schools and colleges. And the Lord, out of the blue, came up with this point into my heart. The Lord said, if you will accept this cross from my hand. I had to be with her for 24/7, like totally I needed to pay all my attention to her. So the Lord said, if you will accept this cross from my hand, well, then I can bring so many more souls to the Lord than through all the ministry you would do in that time. But, he said one thing, make sure you are at peace with those whom you live with. Make sure you bear the fruit of the Spirit in the midst of those who you live. Above all, make sure you forgive those who are around you. He was so particular about these, because probably we expect a lot from others. We expect help because we are helpless. We are there with the child. We need others to support us, and they may not be there when we want. But the Lord kept saying, I am in charge. Let go. Make sure but that you are at peace. You are caring. You are forgiving. You are gentle, and you trust in me. And this was something new. This insight, this word which the Lord brought into my heart.
How did you take that very profound command and direction from the Lord, that first of all, this child is not going to recover, that this is a cross I have given to you, and also be vigilant about, and don't take on any resentments, binding behaviors that are going to blame anyone, but that this, like settling that cross in the arms of Saint Therese of Lisieux, you see her beautifully holding that cross at the statue. I don't think we, as Dr. Josephine was saying too, I don't think we realize that, God actually wills some suffering in our lives.
Yeah. And so I thought that was something new. As you said, we do not expect that kind of a response from the Lord. So I sought, the Lord always taught me one thing, go back to the saints or the history of the church and what I have revealed to them. So I just said, Lord, confirm it, that this word is spoken in my heart through the lives of somewhere among the saints, something like this. And amazingly, a book came into my hand. It was about Our Lady of Fatima. And she was speaking to the children there. And she asked the children, Jacinta and Francisco and Lucy, asking them, do you want to save souls? And they said, yes, we would like to save as many souls as we can. Said, if you would really love to save souls, that's your desire, your heart's desire, then she said, will you accept every cross that I bring into your life as from the hand of the Father? Receive every cross and go through it, offering that suffering unto me, unto the Lord and to the Father. So when I saw that it is very fruitful, it's something very, very precious, but we have to handle it in the Spirit, bearing the fruit of the Spirit, then it can have amazing graces. And so once I understood that, then I began to calm down, began to not really search for solutions, to see how. There was a phase when I did examine myself. Where am I spiritually? Are there areas I need to forgive? Are there areas I need to rectify? Because in one sense, my little one's life depended upon my life, in one sense. Am I acceptable to God? Am I living my life? I should not be a block to her being blessed. And so I put my whole heart and soul into living the way God wanted me to live. And I feel she lived with us for 3 years. But those are very, very precious years of my life, one of the most precious years of my life. And the Lord taught me so much about suffering, about living the cross, even about death, because finally we took care of her and we, in one sense, allowed her to go back to the Father. It was simply an amazing journey in those early years of my life.
It does sound
And I give thanks to God for those years of my life.
And you know what's beautiful is both of you, as you spoke about your painful times, which were extremely painful, there's this great spiritual joy I saw on your faces. And I think that's a witness in itself that suffering for Christ and with Christ can produce a great spiritual effect in us and a joy. I did it.
Yes.
Like giving birth.
Yes.
I did it. I did what you wanted. I achieved what you wanted me to do. So the difference, of what I saw as witnessing people dying and things is that those who don't have this gift of faith are truly, truly left with suffering only. So we have suffering and grace. Suffering with grace and in grace.
Even though we seem to think she is not being healed, the doctor who was watching over her for 3 years, he says, her condition over the past year, he was a pediatric surgeon also, he said, I've seen many biliary atresia conditions, but she was the worst in one sense. Her ducts were totally sealed. But she's the most beautifully preserved. Because they said she would lose her eyesight, her bones would be brittle, she would be mentally disturbed, so many, she'd be bleeding all over, but none of those issues were there. She was such a joyful, cheerful, other people oriented, but her liver cirrhosis was there, which finally led her to her
But
final
a
hours.
little miracle in itself there.
Yes.
That
How God
she
walked with us.
Right.
But He had His plan. He wanted to take her home. That was God's will and plan.
I think that's another big issue too. It's His plan.
Yeah.
When we create our own suffering, we were talking about that before the show, creating our own suffering. I think when we enter into suffering, we do need to look at what is this suffering, and is it because of my plan? Am I making my life miserable? Or is it His plan that He's asking me to hold this cross? And so we see Mary standing at the foot of the cross. That was the will of God. Mary watched her son be, completely demolished by suffering. Jesus Himself, to stand and suffer was the will of God for both of them. The best we can do is continue to discern and pray, what is your will, Lord, and let me graciously accept it. So I thank God for your beautiful testimonies, because we often hear the story of the power, the strength, the recovery, the healing. But before us always is the crucifix.
Yes.
And we're praying, heal me, you know. I remember one young man, he was not a Christian, but he looked at that crucifix and he said, it amazes me, this was in the United States, and he was not a Christian, but he said, it amazes me how all these people kneel down before this crucified man, this, you know, tortured man, and pray for a house and a car. You think of it. I want the best college education. Please get me the visa to USA. In front of this crucified man, don't they have a heart? Don't they know who that, don't they feel some passion, you know? So I think to be close to that crucified man means we also share in the will of God that He shared to suffer and save souls, which is what I think the point of the saints all tell us, that's why they love suffering. So please, as Father Matthew Naikampanable would say, don't waste your suffering, right?
Yes.
Embrace it. If it's not to be healed, embrace it. Offer it for those souls in purgatory, those people around you, for your past sins. And Sirach 38, a sorrowful heart saps one's strength. Do not give your heart to grief. Drive it away and remember your own end. So we can suffer, but continue to witness this joy of the Holy Spirit. Sorrowing is against our health too.
Yes, I always ask my patients, who said that you cannot be happy with the problem?
Wonderful.
I always used to tell them, you know, all of us have a problem. So I always ask them when they come and see me, do I look as if I have a problem? They'll say, absolutely no. So I say, I'm sitting here with the same pain, you're sitting opposite me. So I said, you don't have to all the time project your problem or keep it, you know, all the time on your face. Who said you cannot be happy with the problem? You can always be in your faith.
Beautiful. Yes. Beautiful. So we're very grateful that Rena and Dr. Josephine can be with us today. And we do hope that this program has helped you to understand your ministry of suffering in your personal life, in your family life, and given you great joy so that you will do as Jesus said, take up your cross and follow me. So we welcome you back for our next program next week, To Her God, and hope that you will join us then. Thank you for joining us today.